There are 1,000 ways to die in the 41st millennium, but only a handful of deaths that carry meaning. For most souls, the galaxy is little more than a meat grinder, a machine that chews flesh and spirit alike until nothing remains but dust on forgotten worlds. Tyranids, they say, are the most merciless hunters ever spawned, devouring biomass, stripping planets bare, and leaving only husks behind. But those who have truly seen the Ancient Ones, the Necrons, whispered that the Tyranids at least end you. The Necrons do not grant such mercy. I am speaking as if from the bridge of the Imperial Navy frigate Resolute Dawn, its hull scarred from brushfire engagements against splinter fleets. We had been dispatched alongside 2 other vessels to the Colossus system, a dying star with a single habitable world, Veyros II. Vox reports suggested approaching Tyranid activity, another feeder tendril of Leviathan sweeping the fringe. The Astra Militarum had already dug in on Veyros II, choke points carved across ash dunes and fortified bastions manned by regiments of the 108th Veyrosian Steel Guard. They expected a swarm. They were prepared for hunger. What none of them knew, what none of us knew, was that Veyros II was not barren. Buried beneath its shifting wastes lay something older than the Imperium itself, something that does not hunger because it has no need, something that does not sleep though it pretends to slumber. On the Dawn's auspex, we first noticed it as silence. Tyranid fleets scream across the void with psychic resonance, a background howl of hunger that pounds in every astropath skull. But in Colossus, there was nothing. An absence so profound that even our machine spirits balked at registering it. The Vox hissed static. The warp shimmered like a drowned pool. It was not peace. It was erasure. Admiral, I recall one of the junior officers whispering, his voice dry as parchment. The auspex reads, "Negative life signs on the planetary surface. Yet the Guard are down there." Impossible. The Guard were very much alive. Their Vox traffic had been constant before entering system. But now, silence. We assumed Tyranid interference at first, a shadow in the warp. Yet as we drew closer, we saw Veyros II from orbit, and it did not bear the signs of consumption. No feeder spores, no chitinous growths, no bioships circling. The Tyranids had not yet arrived, yet the surface shifted. Vast cracks scored the desert wastes. Hexagonal patterns sprawled across the sand, as if the ground itself had once been part of some titanic machine. From orbit, they glowed faintly emerald, a lattice of energy rising from beneath the planet's crust. And then came the Vox transmission. A single transmission across all Imperial channels at once. Not in High Gothic, not even in any known Xenos tongue. It was a mechanical chorus of voices, ancient beyond measure, layered in tones so cold they seemed carved from the void itself. The harvest begins. The Admiral demanded a translation. None was required. Every man on that bridge knew the meaning. Below us, the 108th Veyrosian reported movement. Entire sectors of the desert collapsing in geometric perfection. soldiers falling into trenches that had not existed minutes before. From the depths, black shapes rose, skeletal figures clad in necrodermis, eyes burning like green suns, weapons humming with energy stolen from forgotten epochs. The Tyranids had not yet arrived on Veyros II, but something far worse had already awakened. And as the guard raised their lasguns and prayed, we realized with dawning horror the Tyranids destroy life to consume it. The Necrons destroy life because they always have. The first war songs of Veyros II had begun, and we were already too late.
The first awakening is never quiet. Across Veyros II, the desert did not tremble with the fury of tectonics. It aligned, as if the world had always been nothing more than a sarcophagus waiting to be opened. Entire mesas collapsed into hexagonal sinkholes. Pillars of blackstone rose where moments earlier there had been barren dust. Soldiers of the 108th Veyrosian Steel Guard found themselves cut off from their own command lines. Regiments divided by geometric trenches that glowed sickly green from below. The Guard did what the Guard always do. They fought with discipline, efficiency, and faith. Vox units barked orders across the crackling channels. Form firing lines, heavy bolters to the front. Dozens of chimeras wheeled into position, their autocannons whining. Veteran squads set their las cannons on collapsing ridgelines, sighting targets among the shifting terrain. And then the Necrons came. They emerged not with a rush, but with a calm inevitability. Silent ranks of skeletal forms strode from the fissures. They bore no banners, no war cries. Their weapons, Gauss flares, pulsed with viridian light, each beam stripping flesh from bone in a single shrieking second. Where a Tyranid horde might overwhelm with sound and fury, these things brought only stillness. One heartbeat, a guardsman screamed. The next, he was gone, reduced to drifting ash on the wind. Captain Dairon of the 108th Steel Guard rallied his men with a clarity born of desperation. He had fought Tyranids on Baraka, orcs on Harrow's Deep, and chaos cults on Necrovia. But nothing in his long service prepared him for this. Still, he was no coward. "Focus fire," he bellowed. "Drop the front rank. Make them pay." A disciplined volley of lasguns lit the night, red beams cutting through the shadows. For a moment, guardsmen cheered. A Necron warrior staggered, its ribcage cracked open by concentrated fire. But then, with impossible grace, the machine's body shimmered. Metal reformed, repairing itself in real time. Within seconds, the warrior stood whole once more, its dead gaze never wavering. "Emperor, preserve us," a trooper whispered. Dairon didn't flinch. He ordered basilisks to fire. Earthshaker rounds howled across the desert, slamming into rising monolithic structures. Explosions tore sand and steel skyward, cratering the battlefield. The air was filled with grit, smoke, and the pounding thunder of Imperial artillery. For a moment, even the Necron advance slowed. But artillery fire uncovered more than it destroyed. Beneath the surface, larger shapes stirred. Shadows the size of titans moved in the dust, awakening constructs that had slumbered for millennia. Monoliths rose, their pyramidal forms crackling with lightning arcs that shredded entire platoons. From orbit, aboard the resolute Dawn, we watched in mounting dread. The Admiral clenched his fists, knuckles bone-white. We came for Tyranids, not this, never this. The astropath, pale and bleeding from nose and ears, raised her head. They are everywhere. Their minds are not minds, their voices are not voices. They do not think, they remember. Endless memory, endless hate. It was then the Tyranids arrived. A shadow fell across Veyros II as bioships pierced the void, descending like predators scenting blood. Spore pods rained fire into the atmosphere, streaks of burning entry lighting up the night. The swarm had come to feed, but it had not come alone. It was walking into a war already in motion. In the chaos of orbital chatter, Imperial officers argued. Should we fire upon the descending swarm? Should we withdraw? Should we abandon the guard entirely? The Admiral silenced them all with a single order. Hold position. Observe. Below, on the deserts of Veyros II, two nightmares collided. Tyranid spores burst open in hissing clouds, disgorging gaunts and warriors in endless tides. They charged, chittering, claws clattering. They hurled themselves at the Necrons with blind hunger. The Necrons did not break ranks. They adjusted their firing lines with mathematical precision, Gauss fire scything down hundreds of Tyranids in seconds. For every Necron that fell, it rose again, repaired by a silent technology the swarm could not comprehend. The battlefield became a slaughterhouse of clashing horrors. The guard, trapped between, had no choice but to fight both. Dairon ordered his regiments into defensive squares, lasfire cutting into both Tyranid and Necron alike. Chimera autocannons shredded gaunts, while bayonets plunged into chitin and steel alike. Above it all, the Vox crackled with an alien phrase, repeated like a prayer. The Necrons were not speaking to the humans. They were not even speaking to the Tyranids. They were announcing inevitability to the stars themselves. The harvest does not end. Still with us in the darkness? Hit that like button if this tale chills your soul.
War is horror, but worse still is when the enemy feels nothing of it. By the third day of fighting on Veyros II, the Guard were no longer fighting for victory. They were fighting for position, for survival, for one more hour of life. Captain Dairon's command squads huddled in shattered hab blocks, trying to coordinate across a battlefield where Vox signals faltered, jammed by Tyranid biointerference and Necron static alike. Orders turned to fragments. Hold the line. Reinforce Sector 8. Emperor guide you. The Tyranids struck like a living flood, swarming over barricades in a frenzy of claw and fang. Gaunts boiled up from spore craters. Warrior beasts towered above them, directing the tides with shrieks that rattled windows. Carnifexes lumbered through Imperial trenchworks, their armored hide shrugging off crock grenades. Against such hunger, even the most disciplined soldier faltered. But the Necrons were worse. When Tyranids kill you, your scream ends. When Necrons kill you, your scream lives on the lips of those who see you unmade. Gauss fire didn't simply pierce flesh, it disassembled it. Guardsmen vanished in bursts of emerald light, their bodies reduced to dust motes. Whole squads vanished in seconds.
And if a man managed to wound one of those skeletal warriors, if he saw it fall, he would watch in despair as it rose again, its wounds knitting, its gaze unbroken. Dayron made decisions with cold precision. He ordered retreat from Sector 6 when the Tyranids overwhelmed the artillery line. He directed meltgun teams to focus on Necron constructs, targeting monoliths as they unfolded shimmering portals to disgorge more warriors. He ordered basilisks to fire point blank, barrels glowing white-hot until they warped. He did all of it without hesitation. His soldiers obeyed because they trusted him, because faith is stronger than fear. And yet, for every maneuver that bought them minutes, they lost hours elsewhere. The Guard were not fighting a single enemy. They were fighting in the jaws of two predators at once. From orbit, the Resolute Dawn recorded the clash with grim efficiency. Vox reports flooded in, images of gaunts shredded by lasfire only to be crushed beneath Necron-heavy constructs. Tyranids hurled themselves with suicidal hunger at Necron ranks, tearing metal apart with claws that dripped acid ichor, only for the machines to reform moments later, merciless and unchanged. The swarm was unending, but the Necrons were undying. It was not a war. It was a calculation. The Tyranids fought to consume biomass. The Necrons fought to deny it. And humanity, nothing but collateral in their equation. Inside his command dugout, Captain Dayron stood before a sand-scarred holomap. The red icons of his companies dwindled by the hour. He slammed a fist against the console. We bleed them both. If the Tyranids feed, we are ash. If the machines harvest, we are ghosts. We hold because there is no other choice. A Vox officer, his hands trembling, whispered, "Sir, what if there is nothing left to hold?" That question would haunt the survivors. By the fourth night, the battlefield itself seemed alive. The sands shifted, drawn by the awakening tomb world. Blackstone pylons erupted in grids, spitting arcs of energy that tore through the swarm. Necron destroyers skimmed above the dunes, their weapons slicing through Carnifex armor as if it were parchment. Tyranids retaliated in waves, hurling themselves into those pylons, clogging them with their corpses, chitin sizzling under alien energy. The Guard fought where they could. In one memorable stand, a squadron of Leman Russ tanks rolled into a Necron phalanx, their battle cannons roaring. The armored spearhead plowed through gaunts and skeletal warriors alike, track blades crunching bones both living and metal. For an hour, they carved a line in the sand that no enemy crossed. Competence, bravery, the finest of the Guard. And then, in a heartbeat, green lances from Necron heavy weapons tore through 3 Russ hulls, splitting them apart like tin. Their wreckage burned as the phalanx marched on, implacable. In orbit, the Resolute Dawn trembled under the Pykic storm. The astropath screamed in her restraints, clutching her head. "They are not fighting us. They do not even see us. They fight only each other, and when they finish..." She convulsed, blood running from her eyes. "We are nothing." On the surface, Captain Dayron watched as the Tyranids surged once more against the Necron front. For a fleeting moment, he thought he saw the impossible. The Necrons pushed back. For all their cold eternity, they too could be overwhelmed by the sheer immensity of the swarm. And yet when the dust cleared, he saw the truth. The Necrons had not fallen. They had simply advanced elsewhere, their lines shifting like a machine recalibrating. The Tyranids had won nothing. The Guard's position collapsed sector by sector. The war was not theirs to win, it was theirs to endure. "The Emperor protects," Daeron whispered, as much to himself as to his men. "But only if we buy the time for him to do so." The desert trembled again, and far below, deeper tombs began to open. The war in the shadows was only beginning. The tension builds. Subscribe to witness more tales from the Dark Millennium.
By the 6th night on Veyros II, the desert no longer looked like a desert. It looked like a battlefield sculpted by alien hands. The dunes were jagged trenches of obsidian black stone. Pylons the size of cathedral spires jutted from the ground, their surfaces etched with unreadable glyphs that pulsed with emerald light. The stars themselves seemed dimmer, hidden beneath a haze of spores and radiation. This was not a battlefield where men belonged. This was a graveyard, and the gravediggers were still at work. The Tyranids did not relent. The swarm crashed against the Necrons in tides of chitin, endless as the sea. Hormagaunts hurled themselves into Gauss fire, their bodies dissolving into dust even as others trampled over them. Winged gargoyles blackened the skies, shrieking as they dived against hovering Necron destroyers. Biotitans the size of hive spires lumbered forward, vomiting acid torrents that scoured through Necron phalanxes. And still the Necrons advanced. They did not fight with fury or desperation or instinct. They fought like a clock, cold, perfect, inexorable. Immortal warriors carved paths through swarms, their weapons reducing entire broods to ash. Monoliths hovered like executioners, disgorging reinforcements through shimmering green portals. The swarm's hunger met the machine's patience, and for the first time in the Guard's memory, it seemed the Tyranids had met an enemy they could not drown. Captain Daeron clung to that hope. His men were battered, starving, their numbers broken by attrition. But they fought. They fought because fighting was all they had left. He coordinated kill zones, directing his dwindling squads to fire into the gaps where Tyranids and Necrons tore each other apart. Heavy bolters roared, their casings raining down on blood-soaked sand. Ratlings perched atop ruined hab blocks, picking off gaunt after gaunt with methodical precision. In the heart of hell, the Guard still proved their worth. "Sector 9 secured for now," reported Sergeant Kale, his voice ragged. "By the throne, sir, I don't know how long we can keep it." Daeron's response was simple: "As long as it takes." But the truth was plain. The Guard were gnats on the hide of monsters. For every kill, for every brave stand, the larger war raged beyond their control. The Tyranids adapted, mutating mid-battle to counter Necron tactics. Gaunts grew thicker carapaces against Gauss beams. Carnifexes sprouted spore cannons to bombard distant phalanxes. Hive tyrants screamed commands that twisted the swarm into new formations. The Necrons adapted in turn. They shifted their lines, recalibrated their fire patterns. Scarab swarms erupted from the sands, stripping Tyranid corpses into nothingness, denying the hive mind its precious biomass. Where the Tyranids sought to consume, the Necrons sought to erase history. The clash reached a new scale when the Tyranid hive ship descended into low orbit, vomiting torrents of mycetic spores in a final push to drown the planet. The sky became fire as millions of organisms rained down. The Necrons answered. From beneath the planet's crust, colossal structures broke the surface, obelisks that floated like shards of a broken god. Their energy lances reached into the sky, swatting down spores before they touched the ground. The atmosphere itself burned green as the ancient weapons shredded the swarm from above. On the resolute dawn we watched in awe and terror. "God Emperor," one officer muttered, clutching a rosary. "The machines are winning." But that was not victory. It was annihilation. The guard on the surface saw it too. Dayron's men fought in the glow of a war they could not understand, their lasfire little more than sparks compared to the cataclysm around them. A platoon cheered as a hive tyrant fell, riddled by Necron beams. Their cheer died when the same beams swept through their position, vaporizing friend and foe alike. The Tyranids fought with desperation, the Necrons with inevitability. Humanity was caught in the middle, irrelevant, unnecessary, doomed. Sergeant Kale spat blood and laughed bitterly as another wave of Gaunts poured into their trench. Relentless, they called the Tyranids. "Emperor, help me. I'd take 1,000 of these beasts over one of those metal bastards." Still with us? Comment your theories below. What corruption stalks our heroes? The war was reaching its climax. The Necrons were revealing what they had always been. Not conquerors, not even killers. They were erasers of history, of existence itself. And on Veyros II, the final harvest was at hand.
The end began without fanfare. There was no great explosion, no last charge, no cry of victory. There was only silence. The kind that follows when everything living is finally exhausted. By the 9th day on Veyros II, the world was no longer a battlefield. It was a crypt. Tyranid carcasses carpeted the dunes in mountainous heaps, their ichor soaking into blackened sand. Where their bodies should have been reclaimed by the hive mind, they were stripped away by Necron scarabs, reduced to dust, their biomass denied. The swarm was not defeated, it was erased, atom by atom. For the Astra Militarum, the nightmare was worse. Captain Dayron stood in the ruins of what had once been Command Bastion Alpha. His uniform scorched, his las pistol long since run dry. Around him huddled barely 36 survivors, the remnants of regiments that had once numbered in the tens of thousands. Some were wounded, others broken, but all of them stared hollow-eyed at the horizon, where green light blazed and the earth itself shifted. The Necrons no longer fought, they harvested. Warriors swept across the sands in perfect ranks, killing not in anger or even strategy, but in the mechanical certainty of inevitability. They ignored the wreckage of Tyranids, ignored the broken weapons of the guard, and turned their Gauss flares upon the last beating hearts of men. "Why us?" whispered Sergeant Kale, clutching his side where a claw had torn him open. "Why do they even care?" Dayron, weary beyond words, gave the only answer he could. "Because we are alive."
Above, the resolute dawn broke orbit at last. The Admiral's voice, tight with guilt, rang through the last vox link to the surface. All Imperial assets are ordered to withdraw. This world is lost. Emperor, forgive us. And then, nothing. The ships were gone. Humanity had abandoned Veyros II. The survivors fought anyway. They fought because surrender was not a word in the Imperial lexicon. They fought because death was preferable to what the Necrons promised. Lasguns spat against emerald fire. Bayonets clashed against metal that could not bleed. The few functioning chimeras roared into the fray, engines screaming, their hulls burning before they even reached their marks. In the final stand at the shattered shrine of Saint Illyra, Captain Dayron rallied his last men. "The Emperor watches," he shouted, his voice breaking. "We die with his name on our lips." They held the line for 10 minutes. When the end came, it was not with death, but with unmaking. Gauss fire swept across the shrine, stripping soldiers from existence as though they had never been. Kale fell first, his body unraveling in a hiss of dust. Others followed, screaming prayers that went unanswered. Dayron himself stood until the last pistol raised against an oncoming phalanx. His final sight was not of Tyranid hunger, nor even of alien cruelty. It was of eyes burning green, utterly without pity. And then he too was gone. In orbit, long after Imperial ships had fled, the Necrons stood alone upon Veyros II. Not a single Tyranid moved, not a single guardsman breathed. The silence of the tomb returned, vast and suffocating. The Tyranids had been relentless, but the Necrons were merciful in comparison. At least the swarm devoured, at least the swarm ended you. The Necrons left nothing. No record, no memory, only erasure. And in the grim darkness of the far future, that is a fate far worse than death.
Veyros II was never marked on Imperial charts again. The Administratum labeled it lost to Tyranid incursion, a convenient fiction to explain its disappearance. But those who survived the orbit above, those who saw the harvest from afar, whispered another truth. The Necrons had claimed it, body and soul. The tale spread like a plague through fleet corridors and drinking dens, whispered among guardsmen who had fought Tyranids before. They spoke with haunted eyes. The swarm eats you. The machines erase you. Choose your death wisely. The galaxy is vast, filled with horrors beyond counting. Tyranids strip worlds to bone and move on. Chaos corrupts, twisting flesh and soul alike. Orcs burn, Eldar deceive, Tau subjugate. But Necrons do not conquer, they do not enslave, they simply delete. What they harvest cannot be recovered, what they touch is gone. And so the question remains, which enemy is worse? The hunger that devours or the silence that forgets? The Imperium cannot choose both. It must endure both, and men like Captain Dayron, erased from memory, will never know that their struggle was less than a whisper in the darkness. The Emperor protects. More stories await.